Okay, we will continue with the town budget. Further question, were we all set with the other question? I think on the insurance, we're right, medical answer, that's all set. Okay, so any further questions? John?
So I got a question about the COLA. So I want to make sure I got it understood. My recollection is that the COLA kind of comes up every 2 years, maybe?
Every 2 years, the COLA is, we are required to review awarding a COLA to the bargaining unit that is the police department. That is the only requirement we have. It does not exist in the contracts with the other two
Okay, and then,
pension plans.
do I have it right that this past year, the issue came up and they said no to the COLA this past year? And that would have been the pension committee?
We did not act on it. The pension committee made a recommendation not to do it.
Not to
The
do it,
board,
okay.
the Board of Selectmen worked through it over an extended period of time. We determined that we weren't going to grant a COLA in the traditional fashion that we do. We wound up doing a series of permutations of impacts on awarding COLAs because the traditional view is awarding the COLAs at 100% of the consumer price index, which was about 7%, and then at 60% of it. Those costs were pretty extensive and prohibitive, so we didn't feel that it was appropriate. And we continue to talk about it because in good faith with some of the members of the union that were asking us to do so, the police union, we went back and took another look at it. And just for the record, we did not just look at the police department. We looked at all three units. We all consider it an equity issue, and there's historical precedent that any time a COLA was granted in the past, regardless of whether or not it was triggered by the police contract, that all three units, bargaining units, or beneficiaries under those plans were granted a
Okay,
COLA.
and that's the Board of Education non-certified, I think I was told, and the Guilford Town employees
Yes.
as a whole.
Yes.
Okay, and then I believe the estimate is about 100,000 a
It will
year.
be- it'll
Is
be
that
about 100,000.
going to carry out for about 10, 20 years?
20 years, yep.
So that's $2 million over 20 years. All right, so really the question is that going forward, what is the process for it to be approved? Does the pension committee approve it, or does the Board of Selectmen
Board of
approve
Selectmen
it?
approves it.
So the Board of Selectmen could override the pension
Right.
committee if they recommended against it?
Yeah, and there's an interesting twist to that this year, because actually the Board of Finance in your deliberations and the voters are the ones who will make the final decision. Because this is in there, we have allocated $100,000 in our operating budget to cover the first year of this. Without that, if there are cuts to the budget, or the budget goes down at referendum, there is a possibility, and as a board has made this very clear, that would be one of the areas that we would look at.
So then, as a follow-up, I thought the money was in reserve for personnel for the potential approval of the
Right.
COLA. Is it done
The
deal?
money,
Is
the
COLA
money is, the
approved?
money is set aside. The Board of Selectmen has agreed to grant a COLA, which is effectively, I think, MJ, 2.8%, and the numbers are
So
right
it's
around
done,
100,000.
it's done, it's already approved by the Board of Selectmen?
Jonathan, it is not done until the budget gets passed. That is an area that would be,
It's going to referendum.
Yep. I'm just saying the Board of Selectmen's already
But
Put it in the
made
budget.
their
Right.
decision.
Put it in the budget that we're gonna
right.
talk about.
All right, I was wondering, how's the final decision
Right.
made?
No motion has been made to award a COLA. It is just in
If
the
it
budget.
survives the budget, it will be granted.
And if it survives this budget and it's awarded, then it's an obligation going forward.
Going forward, right.
Further questions?
Like the Board of Education, the Board of Selectmen had discussions about salary deficiencies
Yes,
in
we
their,
did.
in the GEA, the General Employee Union.
Yep.
I guess my question is, what brought this up as a priority? Were you losing people, or were you having trouble recruiting? Were
Both.
you being poached
Yeah.
as well?
Yes.
I meant the town, not you, but,
Yeah,
you
right.
know.
It is both recruitment and retention, and I will also, at the sake of boring you to tears, give you a little history on municipal salaries and benefit programs. Traditionally, municipalities paid below market rates in the private sector, largely because they were benefit-rich programs. Well, we can no longer say that. We went to HSAs, and we no longer offer a defined benefit plan or a pension. So quite honestly, we never caught up with that imbalance when we took away those salaries, okay? Other communities have done it. We did some market analysis. We did it. The GEA did their own. So we both came to relatively similar conclusions that, based against our peers, Madison being one of them, we were not paying our employees, and quite honestly, I hate to use this term, but for some of them, barely living wage. So this was an effort that we put together. We worked, we basically put an MOU together with the union. We didn't actually go into bargaining, a bargaining session. We didn't open up the contract, but we had agreed to do a review collaboratively. And the other thing we did, I think Dr. Freeman mentioned this too, it takes 13 years for a teacher to get to the top step. We had a similar situation. Grades, which are the job band, and then the steps within it. We actually, a couple of years ago, took out the two lower bands to make it the entry point better, and now we're collapsing the steps to 4 steps. So, and that we think this is and actually, Sandy, you were on that committee that was working with the union. Anything you want to add to it?
Just that in the last contract negotiation, we made some, I think, we made some positive steps towards these inequities, but we recognized it wasn't enough. And this is going back for years of, I don't know if underfunding is the right word, but all the things that Matt just said. And again, we've heard these words, retention and recruitment, over and over again. And if this budget goes through, we're still really, we're not going to be higher than any of the other towns. We're still going to be maybe at the 60 to 70%. But it just recognizes rewarding the talent that we have in town and trying to keep them.
Right, and we've smoothed this out, because not everybody is getting adjusted at this point, all right? And there are some peoples who are not being impacted, will not be impacted. Some job levels will not be impacted by this. But we have layered this over 2 years. A certain group has been targeted for year 1, another group will be targeted for year 2.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question.
All right, I gotta do a replacement cost, replacement salaries. I
Yep.
know it's just the dredging subject each time we meet, but it seems like we talk about it a lot, and it keeps seeming to be a bigger component of the budget each year. I think this year it's maybe over 3.2% of the budget, so, and that's between the police and the fire department together, but it's pretty, it's a material part of the budget. So I'm wondering, I keep saying if we had a little more flexibility, and I know that's difficult to decide, but, can we run a shift with one down on the manpower for that shift to see if it gives us some flexibility to not have as high of a replacement salary cost? So I don't know, I understand that you want to balance whether you need to do that or not with safety and so forth, but do you think, it seems like we're not doing anything about it. You think we could at least study that? Like maybe say, let's hypothetically look at it this year and say, if we did run maybe one man down on some shifts where we had to have replacement salaries involved, what would we have saved? Does that seem like something that might be
That's
possible?
that's an exercise that we've done pretty regularly, and I know I've got Chief Hyatt is on the line as well as the chiefs here. You want to talk a little bit about the replacement salaries and why it is essential for us to keep the staffing complement as is defined currently?
As we do in every year, some of the critical functions of this, especially since 2018, since we took on the SAFER grant, staffing North Guilford, one of the big components was reducing those response times. We can't put just one firefighter there, we had to put 2 firefighters there, so you need one person to drive the ambulance and one person to ride in the back. So when you talk about the operational needs, some obviously going back to 2002 when the MMA study was incorporated and what we needed to create as a path. So that plan and that study that was done back in 2002 has essentially steered our course for the last 20 years of how we've transitioned on top of call volume, ISO, and all of the other things. As everyone knows, we reported out, Matt, you reported out in our slideshow, last year was one of our busiest years actually ever. We were about 350 calls above last year. Call volume ebbs and flows, but the most critical piece is the staffing level and maintaining that to be able to, and I think one of the other questions asked by Board of Finance recently was, do we see potential increase based on that, especially with the growth coming in town? There's a ton of expansion in residential development in many different areas. To be able to do what we're doing today, we absolutely see a potential that our call volume is going to continue to expand, and we're going to need all 10 of those firefighters. Several times throughout the year, 4 of those firefighters, 2 ambulances, for the most part, are every day gone. The workload has continued to increase, especially with the development of medical offices and more transport of doctors' offices out on the shoreline, pushed out in the suburbs. So again, I think the 10 people that we have is, could we use more? Yeah, but we're not asking for more. We continue to evaluate based on the needs. And every month we report out at this to the Board of Fire Commission. We report our response times. We're still within the acceptable levels. So North Guilford, we've maintained below the 9 minutes. Across town collectively, we're about 7-minute response times. We've maintained an ISO Class 3 rating for our insurance, continued hydrant expansion, water supply, communications. So back to the staffing level, I think we're doing a great job for the 10 people we have, and I appreciate all the hard work that our staff does.
But the nature of the question is, have you put any numbers next to it and said, if we did run a man down instead of, paying for replacement salary cost on that shift, and we did that for 1 year, like would the taxpayers save $1 million, $500,000, $12?
That's what got us to the
$6?
additional 2. So essentially, at some point, our call volume, when the ambulances, we were at 8 per staff, right? And North Guilford wasn't staffed. That single ambulance was going so much, the second ambulance became all replacement costs or all time and a half. We're in the same situation now where at some point the volume of calls that's going to create replacement to go out because we can't predict the calls. So as that 3rd ambulance or 4th ambulance goes out, which is more common than not lately, that's only going to push replacement costs in terms of how many times we need to bring in more staff and resources to supplement our call volume. So yes, we continue to look at that and how many times callbacks or 3rd ambulance and 4th ambulance or back-to-back calls happen throughout our cycle of the month, every year, and continue to evaluate that.
I might add, there's also some impacts felt from workers' comp cases when we have folks out, and I don't know if you'll want to share how many over the past year.
There's 2 right now, long-term workers' comp cases,
So you figure basically 2 full salaries are being replaced,
last year
but we
4
don't
retirements.
get to not pay the salaries.
It was 4 retirements in a row last year, and we just caught up, so.
Can I make a comment, though? It's not really related to the replacement line item, but it was a comment you made about fire hydrants and water accessibility. We had a member of the public Tuesday night that was, as I am every year, dumbfounded by the cost of fire hydrants. But what you said just occurred to me that the benefit to that is a lower insurance cost, not only for the town, but for the homeowner.
Yep.
I just wanted to get that out there, that you know, yes, it's expensive, and it is. There's no doubt about it. It's ridiculous. But there is a benefit to having fire hydrants both for the town and for a homeowner.
Correct. Further questions?
I only have one more.
All right, you got it.
All right.
That's
Come on.
your cutoff.
I don't know if this is a softball, but I got the same concerns about the town with converting someone who's paid on ARPA and hiring them full-time. Do you have some of those from last year and this year?
Yes, we do. Actually, I think Mary Jane provided you with a list of the salaried individuals who
She
are,
actually wrote me that she didn't have that at her fingertips, I believe. She said she didn't have that information.
We didn't have any there are none that we have permanently
Oh.
put in place.
agreed. Oh, yes, we have. We are supplementing some areas with ARPA funds.
No, I know you have
Right,
people who
right,
have the ARPA. I
right,
was
right.
concerned, are you converting them and hiring them full-time?
Jonathan, when you hire somebody, you hire them as a full-time employee.
Okay, that's the issue I
That's
have
the
with the
issue. So-
guidance.
So anybody,
Yeah.
anybody who's been hired during the time that we are using ARPA funds to pay their salaries, they're considered full-time employees.
right.
Permanent is another question. As I think you had heard Dr. Freeman say, and we said when we told you we were utilizing these funds for that, we're going to evaluate the need on a year-by-year basis as to whether or not we should continue to fund that way. In fact, this budget includes one position that is no longer being funded by ARPA funds, and that was one of the folks in the building department, one of the part-time building inspectors. So we're slowly going to wean ourselves back from it where it's appropriate. At Youth and Family Services, where we are allocating $128,000 a year for staff, the numbers I presented the other night suggest that we're nowhere near saying we can let some of those people go. But that is the
But
commitment.
they're going to continue
that-
on the ARPA
yeah,
funds for now.
That is the
Is the
commitment
building
we made.
permit position, that's going from an ARPA-paid position to a
It's in the budget.
town payroll?
Yep.
Okay, so you have one full-time
No,
person?
we have one full-time and we have,
The new permit, that was
no, not the permit technician.
The WPCA coordinator?
Nope,
Never ARPA.
no
Okay,
ARPA.
and there's only the cook and then a safety officer for the school, I think, if I got it
Correct.
right.
You're right.
So
You got
none
them
of
all.
those are going
There's a
from
difference
ARPA to-
between, there's a difference between ARPA funding and new positions. The cook is not in ARPA funding,
The resource officer's not going to
The
be that
resource
way.
officer-
You
Officers
do
not in
understand
ARPA.
my concern. I like the guidance.
I don't
that
understand
you
your
should-
concern, only because we're confusing
All right, well,
what's
let
in
me
ARPA
explain.
and what's not in ARPA.
Let me explain, because the question I'm asking is that I see guidance about using the ARPA money that says to be careful to pick things that are temporary and not to make a long-term commitment. So it concerns me when someone is hired with, ARPA funds, that it should be for a temporary purpose. And the town doesn't have to take the guidance, but I'm seeing the guidance, and I'm wishing we would take the guidance
They're hired
from
regardless of
GOFA.
ARPA funds, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's the same,
So-
you had the same answer from the superintendent. They're hired regardless of ARPA funds.
It's to address a need.
I prefer the guidance of the ARPA funds is followed where it's temporary and it doesn't result in expansion of the
Jonathan,
government
Jonathan,
footprint.
Jonathan.
It's my preference, I'm
Yeah,
not saying you
yeah,
have
no.
to follow it.
Jonathan,
I'm saying that's what I'm looking for. Are we expanding the town government because we're taking people who are hired with ARPA funds and then hire them
It's not the
permanently?
cook, none of those that you mentioned are in ARPA.
Okay, so the
That's
town
my-
side doesn't have
That's my
any.
confusion.
Not in this budget.
Okay.
But in previous budgets, you have approved our request to utilize ARPA funds for some of those positions, Youth and Family Services, and then additional assistance in the Health Department. And I couldn't agree with you more about the caution that needs to be demonstrated with using one-time revenue sources. I think you may recall, a couple of years ago, this board decided to allocate unallocated fund balance to reduce the mill rate. I was vehemently opposed to that. So you're preaching to the choir about utilizing those one-time funds. These are unique circumstances. We've made the commitment that we will evaluate every position that is currently funded by ARPA as to its continuing need in the longer term. Ergo, the fact that we are no longer going to be using ARPA funds for one of the part-time building officials. We're weaning ourselves off slowly, but we've
that's
gotten
not
till
this year, that'll be
2026
next year.
budget. What's that?
That's not this year, that'll
No,
be next year.
that's in the budget that's being proposed that we're talking about.
So there's,
So we replaced ARPA funds with traditional operating budget funds for that.
okay, so
for
you
that.
do have someone transferring from being paid through ARPA funds to being paid on the payroll of the town.
Correct.
And that's the building permit?
That's a part-time building inspector.
Building inspector, okay.
But I think we did also talk about when we did allocate the youth and family services that we understood as a board that it might go beyond the funding and that there might be a point where there is
have to
not the
hire.
same need and that position would also or could be eliminated in the future. So I think we talked through that.
did.
Yeah.
We did. And Lynn Landry, who I saw was on the line earlier, knows fully well that we will be evaluating the need on an annual basis. You know, with caseloads double what they used to be in her shop, I don't see that happening this budget year. Maybe our kids are going to be healthier next year. Maybe not.
So one kind of related question, someone gave me a little bit of a breakdown of how the WPCA coordinator costs will work.
Yeah.
A new salary cost, new overtime cost.
Yeah.
I think there might even be the new software is sort of wrapped into that.
No, that is not part of it.
Oh,
at this
okay, I
point.
thought it was going to be the tracking of the pump outs,
no.
so I apologize if I get that wrong. But I did notice that there was about 72,000 in this estimate they gave me for cost for the WPCA coordinator.
Right.
And I think 39,000 was for overtime. And I was wondering if that's going to be a temporary situation.
That is
Maybe
anticipated.
ARPA funds might be applicable there.
That is anticipated to be temporary as they catch up with record-keeping requirements. I think that was discussed. So those overtime numbers are designed to provide erasing the backlog of things that need to be done.
Okay.
Post-COVID.
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks.
That's it.
Good. I got it. No.
They weren't too bad.
Hey, not bad at all, John.
Other questions?
And I do want to say, I have to say kudos on the insurance. That was definitely a great move for the town.
Thank you.
Saved us a little bit of money there.
It did. It really did.
And I don't know if it was mentioned, but thank you, Mary Jane, for answering all the questions that came from members of the Board of Finance. Just like Linda, you did a lot of work to get those questions answered, so thank you. Okay, you are off the hot seat. So, based on no further questions of either board, it is time for us to go ahead, have some discussion and commentary concerning the budgets presented to us, and possibly vote this evening to move a budget forward to town meeting.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Veronica.
I will start off our discussion. First of all, I'd be remiss if I didn't, our chairman has already expressed our gratitude, but I do want to thank Mary Jane and Linda and the boards of selectmen and education for their time and efforts in putting these budgets together. It's been a collaborative environment over the past, literally, 3 months? So thank you, and thank you very much. For me, every year, it seems like there's one theme that kind of percolates to the top. It's street sweepers, it's turf fields, it's for full-day kindergarten, it's lots of different subjects that people tend to talk about in the community. This year, early on, it seemed to me that the issue that was repeated over and over and over again is people and our employees. And I think our employees are perhaps the greatest asset in our town. Both our Board of Education teachers, staff, and our town employees. And we talked about how recruiting and retaining them has become very difficult. We heard about shortages on statewide in teachers, special ed, world language teachers, nurses, social workers, all of those things. But this budget addresses those issues, and it also addresses things that we really didn't talk about tonight, but we keep our senior tax program intact. We are helping families navigate post-COVID, and we've seen lots of issues. We talked about it, Youth and Family Services, the Park and Rec Department, Meals on Wheels, the meal program that we have for seniors every day, breakfasts, the socialization, how important all those are. I just think that the role of our government is to serve its citizens, and I've concluded that these budgets do that and do it very prudently. However, and there's always a however, I have to say that we are unfortunately in a reval year, and there are a lot of unknowns. And we've heard that we have people in our community that have seen tremendous increases in their of reval, or assessments rather. Our taxpayers are also seeing, just like the town is, increases in the cost of food, fuel, electricity. So there are pressures that are happening, both from the government side as well as the community side. So with that in mind, I think I would like to recommend or suggest that the Board of Education have a cut of $100,000 and the town be cut $50,000. It's a 2/3, 1/3 split, which is how the budget is predominantly laid out, and I do have to say, I think it would be prudent to do that at this time. And that's my thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you for starting. Anybody else?
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I've got the slide, I don't disagree with any of that. I do have a slightly different approach, and I'd like to thank all the town committees, all the committee heads, every department that came in. It's an extraordinarily transparent process, for which I'm terribly grateful. At the end of the day, the financial analyst in me, though, just has to bubble up. And also, the realization that we're elected officials put here by the taxpayers. And we've got our job is to balance the relationship between the services they pay for, the services they receive, who pays for them, how much, why, and when. One of the things, of course, the big thing that's happened is just mentioned about the reassessment. In my view, the assessments were made on a looking forward basis. They were done when the market was white hot and interest rates were at the bottom. So, and there was a little bit of an upward swing, I think, priced into it. That's my assessment. And I haven't heard from anybody who fell below the 32 or 33% grand list rise. I've only heard, as I might, I've only heard from people at 50, 70, 100%. At the same time, there's some, on the budget side, we're a little bit playing catch up, I think, because of COVID, and I'm hoping that this is a little bit, and I hate to say it, a little bit of a backward-looking recovery budget, and I'm hoping that we'll have more visibility and better times ahead. Now the numbers, which I was warned against giving, but if you look at it, at this budget, we've gone up. It's not the increase in tax. We're going to come down to telling the people that, the grand list has saved our tail. But what's happening is that the size of the budget grows every year, and we keep standing on higher ground. And I am concerned about the day where the next assessment, which actually won't be in 5 years but 4, turns around. We have to start dismantling things. And if you look at some of these numbers, it's wild. $114,670,000 is $13,200 per household. Per household. I know what the average, the mean income is in town at $111,000. That's a lot of money, but you know, who can deal with that? And just at a point where we're looking at putting in workforce housing. So, more numbers. On a 365-day basis, the Board of Ed's budget is $188,000 a day, $188,400. The town is $125,750 a day, 365 days a year. So, using that as the basis rather than just a feel that we're here, the Board of Finance, we ought to be doing, you know, something cosmetic. I was going to say let's cut each by 1 day, which would be 188,000 and 125 or 126. I'll pare that down just for round numbers and suggest 150 for the Board of Ed, which is, you know, 12 hours or 15 hours of a day, and 100,000 for the town, which is similar. So it's a bit more than Mrs. Wallace is asking for, but I think it comes a little bit closer to acknowledging where we've been and where we're going.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
So I'd like to see the town and the school reduce the budget together by $1 million, $600,000 for the school, $400,000 for the town. And then in addition to that, I would like the medical line to be adjusted in that appropriation to be decreased by $500,000. In my estimation, over the last 5 years, we've over budgeted for medical to the tune of $5 million. On average, that's $1 million a year. And I'd like to see that money fall into the hands of the taxpayer and not end up into some other program and be pulled out of a surplus in the medical fund. So those are my numbers.
What were your numbers again, Jonathan? $1 million on the Board of Ed? Is that what you
So
said?
I would say 600 for the
Oh,
Board
600
of
for-
Education,
okay.
400 for the town.
Yeah.
But and also the adjustment to the medical line.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry to say, the one point I left out, clearly the rises and the increases are brought on by inflation, but of course everybody in town is faced with the higher costs away from these services as well. So everything we touch costs higher. We've got to acknowledge that.
I would like to say that I agree with Mr. Hartman that the assessment did sort of fall at a peak in the real estate market, and it's going to it's burdensome if you're above the average. So that's true. If you're at the average, it doesn't add an extra burden. But I have talked to a few people too who are above the average.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
I mean, I would support Veronica's proposal. The one thing I would just want to point out, and I'm not going to reiterate what everybody else said, but I know we can't do this as a board, but I just want to go on record saying that if we are going to do the cut to the Board of Ed, that we recognize that it shouldn't come from staffing, if possible. I know I don't have any control over that. I just want to be on the record that if I am going to vote for it, I want to make sure that they can do it without cutting critical staffing positions.
I usually go last. I may not this time. It wasn't until about 4 or 5 days ago that my prepared notes happened about an hour before this meeting because I've struggled with whether to cut it all. And I know that's not can be favored by many, but at the same time, Veronica, I agree about the staffing issues that you mentioned, the benefits. There's 80% of this budget, both of these budgets, that are going towards the people and the inflation. And you can say, well, on the inflation side, well, it just means you need to rein things in. Well, just cut. You know what? You just can't have what you want this year. And the non-discretionary spending of the Board of Education and the town are both less than, both on each side, less than 1%. The rest of it is contractual. Can't change that. And I struggle with the fact that, do I really want to have any kind of a cut during a time where our kids need it, seniors need it, the community needs it, there's infrastructure needs. It drives me crazy when you see an impact of kicking the can down the road rather than balancing it out. And now we're seeing it in a debt service, in a bond authorization that is almost $6 million, and we questioned it. And I will say, I appreciate, Jonathan, literally the 100 questions you probably asked the Board of Education and the Board of
Let's call it
Selectmen.
50. Maybe 100.
One email was 57, but I wasn't counting. And I do appreciate it. But every time I looked at the numbers and I looked at what the needs were, yeah, great, it would be easy to cut $1 million out. It's a number. They'll figure it out, but I don't want the community to have to suffer for it. I appreciate what Bob said. I do believe, it's a really good, realistic way of looking at it.
Taxpayers, gotta look at everybody. Thank you.
I do, but I didn't want to really cut anything. I really wanted this to go to the voters as is. And you said, and Bob, maybe one place where we might disagree a little bit, usually we don't, but about looking at the grand list and looking at the mill rate and looking at what, reval did, and I do know that there are numerous people that were 60, 70, I don't know, maybe even 80, maybe even greater on what their assessment was. But I mentioned the other night that had there not been a reval, and it is a good chance that we would have gotten the same grand list increases we did last year, based on a lot of the smart growth that this community has been doing. We've been reaping some of the benefits of that. So just because the grand list went up 33%, that doesn't mean, that's an adjustment based on things that unfortunately I think, there's going to be several taxpayers that are going to be, they're going to be hit by that.
Municipal towns can't tax income, so they've got to reach into that base. So what we are doing is taxing the unrealized capital gain that they'll never realize, because when you sell high, you sell high. You buy high.
Right.
Okay, so we are taxing uncapitalized, undelivered capital gains, which makes me uncomfortable, but we have no alternative. So I think I've mentioned this before, and I understand Megan's point made earlier. The role of the town in providing services and the schools in providing services over the years has changed. I get it. But over the last 10 years, not leaving this year out, over the last 10 years, inflation rose 25%. Our budget rose 35%. So we are acknowledging that people, we're having to provide more, and we're becoming closer and closer to that first phone call instead of the third or fourth phone call. People don't go to family, friends, church, community, charity, state in that order anymore. It's, it's municipal goes up a little higher. I understand it, but I am just concerned that the size of the budget that we grow every year that outstrips inflation, not that we are this year, because we've been doing a good job, I think. We've made, one of the reasons you talked about these other districts that have to raise so much, because you've made yourselves bulletproof up until this, up until this point. This is good planning. I have nothing against it. I think you're doing great. But I just worry that we're not giving full weight to both sides of the equation, that's all.
I appreciate that.
So I'm one of the people that I have a 72% increase on my reval. So whether we cut $1 million or we cut 100,000 or we cut nothing, my taxes are going to go up.
Yeah.
It's the same pool of money that we have to work with. It's just divided up differently. That's how I look at the reval. I guess I'm torn. I mean, yes, we are elected to approve the money that's being spent, but the Board of Education is also elected, the Board of Selectmen is elected by the same people, the same taxpayers. So if they are electing those officials as boards to decide what money is spent, how the money is spent, then I think we need to recognize that too. And you guys, both sides defended the budgets really well. I'm new to this, so it's only my second time, and both years it's really hard to say that there's anywhere, and you didn't put any fluff in. One of the questions that Jonathan asked of the Board of Ed was how much money was returned at the end of the year. Last year, I believe it was $9,000. It was less than $10,000.
Yeah.
Can I take
That's-
that one step further? Over the last 5 years, it's $66,000 over 5 years that's been given back.
Right. I mean, that's
Take out COVID.
incredible.
19,000 has been given back to the town.
Right.
So to say that the Board of Ed budgets are giving a lot back because they're not spending it all is not happening.
Right.
They've been tight for 5 years. And by the way, last year was a big increase. But the years before that, what did it average? The 6 years before that? 1 point. It was, well, that was including last year. So it was like 1.4, 1.5. So, I mean, these have been frugal budgets going forward, and then all of a sudden, you can't just say everything's on COVID. You can't anymore. But there's this ripple effect that started to happen that was happening before COVID. And, go ahead, Amy.
The reason that our grant list has grown is because people are moving to town. People are moving to town because of the services offered by the town. They're moving to town because of the school system. If we start eroding that, then we start to lose the grant list, and then we have less to work with, and then the budgets go down. So it's that ripple effect that I don't want to see happen either, so.
And the property values go up based on the school system.
Right, right. It's all, again, you can't look at just one piece of the pie, you have to look at the whole pie, so.
I would add one thing to what you just mentioned, Amy, because I agree. The reason that the values went up, one of the primary reasons that the values went up, in my opinion, the way they did, aside from the impact that not having to tuck an elevator to your house every day became more important in 2020 than it had been, is because of the school district and the services that we provide. But I would add to that, it's the level of conservative budgeting that has been implemented by these entities and working at, as Dr. Freeman pointed out, the Board of Education delivers its product, a top, whatever number you want to ascribe it to, it's a top tier school district. And it's doing it at a middle of the road price. And that is, I can't think of a better return on investment for the citizens, for the students, for the property owners, and for the citizens of our town, whether they're young or whether they have children in the school system or they don't. They're realizing the benefit of having a strong school district. At the same time, on the town side, our fire department, our police department, our parks and rec department do a fabulous job providing quality service, great. I mean, we had a contingent of the pickleball folks come in Tuesday night and Thursday night. A few of them are still here. Advocating for the park and rec department to the extent that, I mean, I haven't been doing it as long as Michael has, but that we've never seen before. I mean, not that Park and Rec doesn't get its supporters, but they don't come out to these types of events. That speaks to the level of service that we have across the board. But it's also, in my opinion, because I think the citizens of the town recognize that the Board of Education takes their job to budget carefully, seriously. The Board of Selectmen do that, and that we as a board do that as well. And so I think the proposals for the reductions are, either one I could live with. I propose splitting the difference. We'll do 125 to the Board of Education and 75 to the town as a reduction to their budgets. But I think any of those alternatives, other than Mr. Trotta's, are there's going to be an adjustment of a relatively small amount that the taxpayers are going to see. But I also want to say that
the increase that we saw last year, the increase that we're seeing this year is something that gives me pause going forward because I don't want to keep building on 3 and 4 and 5% budget increases because I don't know how sustainable that would be. I do think we're making up for some of the frugality that we implemented during 2019 and 2020. Hopefully we go back down a little bit lower next year and the year following, but that's my suggestion.
The only other thing I would say is simply the way you look at a lot of the items in these budgets are as, and Dr. Freeman says it usually every year, and I know for Selectman Hoey too, but investments. There's investments that are put into these budgets, and the question is, do we invest or not, and is it the right time? And I will say, every year that I've been on this Board of Finance, it's really never the right time. But at the same time, when you realize a grand list growth, that yes, it's substantial because of reval, but would have been pretty equal to last year, and non-tax revenues that have gone up. You know, I mean, when was the last time we saw interest income at $500,000? Mary Jane's the happiest person in this room.
Yeah.
There are times where an investment
Is warranted.
is warranted and you can do it. If we didn't have grand list growth, as you've seen or heard when I started this meeting about, you know, mill rate increase, you know, decreases, increases based on grand list, there's times you invest and there's times that you don't. And it happens to be that this is a time that we can. Next year, who knows what's going to happen? I mean, yes, we're smartly growing, but we may not see 2.18. We may not see even close to 2. We don't know. And that's where you start to pull the reins back a little and say, listen, that growth isn't exactly where it is. We can't invest as much as we wanted to. And that's where the cuts get bigger. So that would be my last point, is take advantage of investments when there is growth and you can do it on the revenue side.
So then I'll put my comments in the form of a motion, that the Board of Finance ask the Board of Education to cut their budget by $100,000 and the town by $50,000. And put that in the form of a motion.
And I'll put mine in the form of a motion that they reduce.
Cannot do that. I got it.
One at a time.
Do I
One at a
hear?
time.
I'll second.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Megan, second. Discussion. There is a motion on the table.
I said my piece. I think the budget, I think this is adequate.
This is your,
This is my line in the sand.
this is your motion.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, I've never met a tax decrease that I didn't like. It's just trivial, it just doesn't go nearly far enough. I couldn't support it.
Any further discussion? I've said my piece. I don't have anything else.
I added my one piece, even though I can't control
I'm
it,
just giving everybody the option to discuss, that's all. Thank you for going up and up.
I'm trying, I'm really trying here.
I'd love to keep the budget intact, but I could live with that.
All right, if no further discussion, then I will call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I'm in favor.
Okay.
All opposed?
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Did you have?
Oh, sorry. I was waiting for you. I was hoping mine would.
You're opposed, okay. Sorry, we didn't say it long.
All right.
Okay. Okay, that is, bear with me because we're not done.
Well, I'd like to propose a motion that we reduce the medical line by $500,000 in the town budget. Just want the motion to be on the record.
Can we do that? I mean, it's, medical budget is part of the town budget. We've
Right.
approved it. We've approved it. It's a it's a line item.
For the town, you can.
Yeah, we've already approved it.
Oh, 'cause we just did
We
the.
just approved
we
it,
just
yeah.
did
We
the
just
cut to
approved
both the
the
town
cut of
and the Board
50,000
Ed.
and if they want to take it out of medical, they can take 50,000 out of
Putting a
medical.
motion on the table for another cut.
No. You can't do that.
It's not a separate budget.
It's not a separate budget. It's done. You can't just have another motion to do another cut or do another, we made our decision. You opposed it, respectfully. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Give me a moment of personal privilege. We've talked about a lot of things tonight, but one of the things that I think needs to be said, and Dr. Freeman can Dr. Freeman can probably remember these days. It was 15, maybe 20 years. I've been doing this a long time. But at one point, the state of Connecticut funded Guilford for the ECS fund at about 12% of our budget. So you take the current budget that is $68 million, that's rounded up to 70, just for, grins. That's about $8.4 million that we would receive from the state. We get 1.7?
If that.
1.766.
So there have been some other things that have happened over time that has shifted the burden onto our taxpayers. And there's some legislation up in Hartford that's threatening to put more burden on local taxpayers. The organizations we belong to, CCM and COST, are advocating and fighting against many of those. And I have utilized access to our legislative delegation to ensure that they stand in the way of some of these unfunded mandates.
Thank you. Okay, we do have other motions, though, to entertain. So we did the, we've approved the budgets. I need to entertain a motion to approve the revenue budget as presented. So
moved.
Second. Okay, any discussion on the revenue budget? Governor's budget is in, we're pretty, you took the words out of my mouth, that 1.766 is pretty much written in for the next 2 years, right? It's not, it's pretty solid in terms of the fact that we're gonna get that.
We will get that equivalent either in ECS or an adjustment because of the acceleration of the ECS schedule that was implemented 3 years ago and was postponed during COVID, which would see us continue to see a drop in that allocation. But we are being held whole.
Okay.
In fact, there is, what are the numbers from the state there? State equalization grant with some of the other. Yes, we are being held harmless in terms of the state grants.
Okay.
When you take them in the aggregate.
Okay. Any further discussion on the revenue budget? Okay. I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. We move on to bonds. You've heard a lot about both of them, so I'm just going to put them in the, I'm going to entertain a motion. Let someone else make it. Entertain a motion to approve the fiscal year 2023-24 Board of Education capital bond request totaling $1,331,260.
So moved.
Discussion. Have we beat it enough? We had a lot of discussion about them, so both of these questions. I have no issue.
I have some issues with the Board of Education bonding request. I do think the request for the fixtures and the furniture is pretty excessive after asking the taxpayers for $1 million to renovate the building. And I do think the justification is fairly weak, that they can't move the furniture from one location to another without it breaking. I think that is a pretty rich endeavor, and I have problems with that particular request. That's it.
Okay. Further discussion.
I think if they're worried about the furniture breaking, it must be pretty old.
I think it's Guilford Savings Bank furniture from when they remodeled 20 years ago.
It would have been nice to have heard that this number was coming last year when we were talking about the bonding for the building, but I do understand that furniture isn't cheap like anything else. So.
And again, I would remind, as I said before, that there's a maximum authorization amount that comes as part of this bond. And if for some reason it's salvageable, it will be. If it can't be, then we'll spend most of it. If not, then maybe there's some savings there, but it's just a maximum amount, so.
And the same with the tennis courts, that's a contingency that
That is absolutely
maybe our
right.
bid is lower and we don't spend it.
Right, that is not a hard and fast number, and it can't be with the times we're in right now with construction. So, I was just as surprised as you at first until I had a bid come in the other day and I almost passed out in my office. So, that's just the way the construction market is right now. Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you. Final motion. Entertain a motion to approve the town's two-year capital bond request totaling $5,987,668 to be forwarded. Oh, that one part I forgot is to be forwarded to bond council. These both have to go to bond council, so. Did I, what, okay, before I put it in, have someone motion?
Before you
Yes,
put it form in
please
motion,
do.
the number you have before you is the amount of the actual projects themselves.
Right.
It does not include the bonding costs. The Board of Education numbers does include the bonding costs, so I wanted to give that number to you. It would be $6,102,668
That's the number we're approving?
with
With the
bond,
bond-
with
with bonding
bonding
costs.
costs.
Bonding costs.
Right,
We typically discuss our project costs, so,
okay.
but
And they
for
have-
apples to apples, ours would be the,
And just again to clarify on the motions, these are to be forwarded to bond council. We're not
Right.
approving them to be spent. They're going to voters, but we're approving to go to bond council to write it
Correct.
appropriately.
Then it comes back to you
That's
for
not our
approval.
purview.
right,
Thank
but I
God.
had the numbers, so I just wanted you to.
Right, okay.
Sharon, they will come back to you. The Board of Selectmen will have to
Yeah.
approve it, and then you guys will have to approve
Right.
Oh, of course.
the resolutions.
Good point, good point.
The
yeah,
resolutions.
right.
Yes, the resolutions.
It cycles back, yeah, okay. All right, so let me take that no, no one made the motion, so I'm just gonna, entertain motion to approve the town's two-year capital bond request totaling $6,102,668 to be forwarded to bond council.
Second.
Discussion.
It is a 2-year bonding request. I know you said it, but I want to make sure people heard it.
Bears repeating.
With a substantial likelihood of a portion of it being funded from another source.
Right,
Yeah, that's almost half.
exactly. Yeah.
Better than that.
So I guess
Okay.
I have just two comments.
Go
Pretty
ahead.
brief, pretty brief. I just want to point out that for many years, I've been asking the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen to slow down the pace of capital spending. And I do believe that the town and the school can embark upon its bonded projects at a little bit slower pace, thus resulting in a lower debt servicing cost and lower tax bills for residents. I think I'm probably going to just abstain from this bonding request for the town. It does contain a couple of small projects I'd categorize as nice to have as opposed to essential, but they really make up a very small part of the bonding request. And then I will say too that the large $3.2 million project for public safety communications infrastructure, I do have some concerns just about the way it's funded. I feel like it's a candidate for ARPA, and that could save the taxpayers some money doing that large project. That's it.
Further discussion, comment? Okay, call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Abstain.
Thank you. I got it all? I always look over there and make sure I got all the things I forgot one year the revenue, so got scolded. At this point, I want to move forward with item number 3 on our agenda, which is public forum. Why wait any longer? Some people are here. Anyone who's wishing to address the Board of Finance, raise your physical hand here in the audience if you wish to speak, or your virtual hand on Zoom to be unmuted. And please be sure to state your name, address, and limit your comments to no more than 3 minutes. Okay, seeing no hands, virtually. No hands in the crowd. I will conclude with some statements. Basically, this is workshop number 1. Because we completed everything we needed to do, there will be no meeting required for Monday night, March 13th. I know you're all upset. I do want to close by saying thank you again. I didn't say any thanks. A lot of the Board of Finance members already did, but I want to thank again the First Selectman, Matt Hoey, the Board of Selectmen, to Superintendent Dr. Paul Freeman, Chairwoman Dr. Katie Balistraci, and the Board of Education. And I better put in Mary Jane and Linda for all you've done, definitely. You're not just staff to us. You're like, you provide a lot of information. Town school administration and staff that were part of these budgets, department heads, town commissions, and again, as I mentioned, the hundreds of volunteers that were involved in crafting these budgets over the past several months. I do want to thank the Board of Finance for your long hours of review and preparation for these budget meetings, hearings, and workshops. It's a lot of hours. A lot of people don't realize it's so condensed. I will never, ever say that we have the same workload as the Board of Education or the Board of Selectmen. But when it comes to budget season, we are literally hours going over these numbers. And it's not just preparing for this meeting and these meetings. It's literally going to all the other meetings that go with the Board of Education joint meeting and the workshops, capital, and the departments. To those in attendance Tuesday night and tonight, those that have stuck it out, both in person and virtually, or those who will watch these meetings at a later time because we are taping, of course, I do want to thank you on behalf of the board for your involvement and participation to learn more about what is contained in these budgets, how your money is being spent, and how these budgets and these revenues and these bond authorizations will affect our bottom lines. So the process, though, is still not complete. Just a reminder, the annual budget meeting will be on Tuesday, April 4th, in person. I don't know if that's going to be virtual. I think the town meeting will be all in person. Okay, I just want to confirm that. That's why I'm looking. So it would be in person here at the community center at 7:30. The budget referendum will be held on Tuesday, April 18th, from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. at all polling locations. And I highly encourage all voters, please be sure to place this date on your calendar and exercise your right to vote. The annual budget vote, as we always say, is the one vote that really directly affects your household more than any other vote in this town. It's very important. Thank you all. With that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.